Welcome to Think Smart with TMFG. I'm Mike Connon. This is John Iaconetti, financial advisor with CI Asante Wealth Management. John, when people talk about successful business, the conversation usually begins with one number, and that's what's your revenue, right? So it seems like that number should mean everything, right? You often hear a phrase like $1 million business or a company doing 8 figures in sales. And those numbers can sound impressive, but anyone who has owned or managed a business knows that revenue alone doesn't always tell the full story. A business can generate substantial revenue and still feel financially unstable.
Mm-hmm.
So today we're going to talk about important distinction that often gets overlooked in business conversation. What makes your business sustainable?
Yeah, that's where the conversation usually goes to next. Revenue is often the most visible number, but it doesn't necessarily reflect a business's overall financial strength. Profit margins, cash flow stability, and how the business fits into the owner's broader financial plan often tell us a much more complete story.
This is a pretty deep topic to do in a 10 to 15 minute podcast. This is more of a few hour one, but we're going to try to scrape the surface on that. Essentially, revenue is very important, but it doesn't necessarily tell you the health of your business or how you're doing. There's revenue, there's operating profits, and there's net income. A business with high revenues but very thin margins may face, greater financial pressure than a smaller business with a stronger profitability. And many times when I look at businesses, because business owner, you're a business owner too, so we sit here and we see what models, and a lot of these models that have great revenue, I wouldn't touch from a mile away.
Exactly.
Right? They're just scary. It comes to do with when you get to low margin products, it's a very difficult thing to sell. Another critical thing to businesses is cash flow. You can have profits, but could have borrowed so much money that your situation is you're making money, but you have so much debt that you're paying off that you have no cash flow. And cash flow can come in and out because it depends on banks, how much they're willing to lend. There is a lot of things that can affect the cash flows in the business other than just your revenue. Because many companies have borrowed money and is really a part of business.
Oh, absolutely.
And when you think outside the business world, owing money is always a bad thing, right? And it was funny. I had an uncle who owned a business and he always had debt. And I used to always think, why would you have debt? You always seem like this rich guy, right? Why would you have debt? And he went in and sat me down and says, the trick is to use the debt in the corporations to make money. And then you're making money with other people money. And he says, you're always more valuable when you owe more money. Because he said everyone's really concerned about how well you do was his whole thing. So that's an important part of your business, how to manage the cash flow. There is a study where Harvard Business School research highlights that profits and cash flow measure different aspects of financial performance. Profits reflect earnings, while cash flow reflects actual movement of money in that business, which ultimately determines whether a company can meet its obligations. So it's an important thing to focus on.
Yeah. I mean, in its simplest form, I always try to kind of relate it back to just everyday life. And especially when you mention, those companies that could be very revenue rich, but still be struggling. You might know somebody in your life that makes a really good income and a really good salary, yet they have very difficult time trying to pay the bills. At the end of the day, operating costs factor in, debts that you have factor in. So sometimes people go beyond their means. And same thing with a business. You can be making a really good degree of revenue, but maybe you're heavily indebted and all your revenue is going towards paying your debts. Same way that a person with a high income might be beyond their means with a house and having to pay everything towards the mortgage and they're cash flow poor. It's the exact same thing. So revenue or your income that you get as a person isn't your overall means. It's the greater good and the greater picture and looking at, how much you're able to really take away from that business at the end of the day.
Another thing important for businesses, sustainability and how business uses its capital. When you're working for an employer, it's a nice situation because you get a salary.
Yep.
A salary is very different than a business. This is the main separating thing. A salary is someone is committed to pay you a certain amount, and they're going to pay you that amount no matter what really goes on inside their businesses. They may have bonus structure or some type of commission structure, but you're going to get paid no matter what goes on until they might have to let you go.
Yeah.
The one thing about a business is you're the only person that can fire yourself. As an employer, you get fired by other people. So there's the one advantage to being a salaried employee is you do have a stable income, but you have the trade-off where someone can actually decide your future for you. When you have a business, ideally no one can decide your future for you, but that's a bit of a false statement because all your clients can decide your future for you.
Yeah.
And you always have to appreciate that when you're running a business. And it can do very well at times. We see business owners do very, very well. But as markets shift, they're taking the risk on themselves. So, for example, with everything going on right now in Canada, people are exporting to the US. All of a sudden, when they get a situation where they can't get those exports out anymore because of tariffs, the employers are still being paid, but they're taking the risk on that. And I guess the ultimate risk to employees happens if they have to do layoffs along the way.
Yeah.
But that's a really what separates a business owner from an employee.
In regards to sustainability and growth beyond that, I mean, usually when you're running a business, the goal in mind is to keep getting bigger and better every single year. So you need to kind of mitigate those or account for those risks when making decisions about growth and maybe hiring on more staff. We see oftentimes a lot of businesses, maybe they have a great revenue, but that might come from a couple clients or a couple relationships that are bringing on that revenue. You don't want to be top heavy in that sense, because if one of those leave, now all of a sudden your expansion is out the window, right? So a big part of that is understanding the viability of your business, having a diverse group of clients and things of that nature. And if you hire an extra person, is that going to help you bring in an extra dollar worth of revenue? Ideally, everybody you hire, you want to be able to offset that with some form of output or production.
There's a matter of putting money away for a rainy day, and there's a matter of how much that can help push on your growth too. When you listen to stories, I'll give a shout out to a podcast out there called Acquired. It's probably one of the best podcasts I listen to. And it's all about business and how they got started. And it's just amazing how much money the whole idea is. You just pump all those, whatever you're making in profits, they made tons of money, but it just went back into research. When you look at, for example, Jeff Bezos, he never worried about a sale or how much he was going to make a sale. He's worried about having a customer for life. And everything was going to be invested in keeping a customer for life, because it was lifetime revenue of someone who's committed. And I must admit, a lot of us are committed to Amazon. If I go to look at anything, the first place I go is Amazon. It's got great delivery service and all these things. And it's not profitable necessarily how quickly they can get things out to you, but they know that they've locked you in for being a client for life. And over time, they're going to make their money back on everything. And that's a mastermind of business. But many of us in smaller businesses, it's too much risk to go and not keep something there for a rainy day, because, the market's going to move up and down a bit.
Yeah.
And you're still going to have to make payroll.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, in dealing with that, I mean, a lot of owners, you alluded to it previously, do take on quite a degree of financial exposure. It could become in different ways, right? Obviously, every business is going to be a bit different. So you could be a sole proprietorship, you could be a partnership, you could be a corporation. But to some capacity, there is a degree of risk and financial exposure that the owner is going to be able to take on. So there are ways to help mitigate this as well. We often have the discussion around insurance and key person insurance and things like that in order to be able to cover some of these, I guess, in terms of being able to be the owner and kind of have everything on your shoulders. You can mitigate that risk by going out to a third-party insurance company and be able to cover yourself just in case if anything were to happen health-wise, as well as issues with overall costs of the business.
I find one of the biggest mistakes I see from business owners that haven't got to a bigger stage is they mix their business and personal all together. It's all one. They sort of live off their business. They don't have any separation between the two. People that are in a successful business really separate the two. There's the business, and then there's you. And you have to financially plan for yourself outside the business. It's a tricky thing to get people's head around and say, the business is one thing, that's got its own financial plan that's going to grow and create that. But still, you have to do your own personal financial plan and outside that business to make sure you're okay. You do have to get some money out of that business because, there's a large percentage of businesses that fail. And if the business doesn't work out, it's not going to fund your retirement. A failed business is not going to pay for your retirement. You have to make sure you're taking care of yourself and your family beyond the business. There are certain amounts that you have to take out of the business each year, and you have to invest personally to make sure that you have a protection there. And also you have to have your corporate structure set up where if something did happen and failed, it's not going to destroy you personally.
Yeah. And when you have a corporation, it is easier to make that distinction. What is the business and what is me? Where some people get the blurred lines as well is when it's a sole proprietorship or things of that nature where usually if you're filing one tax return, the blurred lines are a lot easier. You do a corporate tax return, it's a little bit different. But it's an excellent point made where not only do you need to invest in the business and have the business grow, you need to worry about yourself and invest in yourself as well.
Good financial planners really work on both those separately. There's one thing working with your financial planner with your business side of things, and we go and try to make sure the business is efficient and structured. And a lot of times your accountant's quite a bit involved on the corporate side of things. They're taking a look at your balance sheets and your income statements and figure out where it is, and they give great feedback for that. I find it great when the accountants come and deal with us and we sit down and go through that together. We see how the business is going. We get the strengths in the business. And the second thing is have your financial planner be looking at your personal side of things to make sure they're protecting you and your family in the future and make sure they're creating a retirement fund to take care of you. If you can run those things together from a tax point of view, The business can be a great savings vehicle too. It's basically pre-tax dollars you can keep invested and grow. And that can take care of your retirement. It's almost like business can be like a giant RSP of sorts if you run it the right way.
Ultimately, the sustainable business really involves just more than your increasing revenues, right? We talked about a couple of these points, but it's consistent cash flows, actually having cash available and some degree of liquidity. The healthy profit margins is a must, but you need to make sure that you're bringing in more than you're end up spending. You need to make sure you're making efficient use of your capital. So you need to be thinking, with this money that you have now, is it going towards either my long-term success? Are you reinvesting that back into the company? Or is it going to personal long-term success? Are you taking it out and are you be able to think about it in the long run? And dealing with the financial risk. Going to be risk in anything you do. We talk about it all the time. You want return, you have to take on some degree of risk. As a business owner, your risk is probably a little bit higher than someone who is not a business owner. Making sure that you're able to manage that risk as well is going to be absolutely crucial in terms of defining your overall sustainable success.
The main thing is having a proper plan for your business.
Yeah.
And there's always that story in the Harvard class when there was the two people with plans. They went into Harvard with their business plans drawn up, and they made more than the whole entire other class just because they had the organization. If you put things down in writing and you have a good plan, you will do well. And that's the key start. And when people come to me and talk about business and I say, well, what's your business plan? They don't have one. It's not worth talking to them any further, because when you don't have a plan, you're just sort of using the business as a quasi part of your life, and it doesn't work very well. So that's one of the most important things. So when people talk about a successful business, the conversation usually starts with revenue. But as we discussed today, that number doesn't always tell you how strong the business really is. Cash flow, profitability, and financial stability behind the scenes often matter just as much.
The bigger question eventually becomes how that business success translates into long-term financial security. If you'd ever like to talk through how your business and personal financial plan work together, you can always reach out through our show notes.
Thank you very much. And that brings us to the end of another episode of Think Smart with TMFG. Have a great day.